Alright, so we got two more questions tonight, number 8 and 9, but this is really a good question. And before we even look at the questions, let's just take a look at the graph and see what we could learn just by looking at the graph. So the first thing I want you to look at is the marginal revenue curve and the demand curve, right? So we learned in the previous eco8 that the marginal revenue is the amount of money that you get in for each additional piece that you sell. So if you're at 10 pieces, right, so 10 pieces right here, and you sell an extra piece, you could see you're getting a little bit less. You're only going to be getting maybe $9 in that extra piece that you sell. Now this should create a question. The question would be, why do I only get $9, right, if I sell one additional piece, when if you go all the way up to the demand curve, right, and we see that if I sell one more piece at the demand curve, I'm selling instead of $20, I'm selling at maybe $19. So that would be a really good question, and the answer is that if you sell one more piece, right, you come down to the demand curve to right here, right, but remember, when you move down the demand curve, you don't sell the 10 pieces, right, the 10 pieces at $20. Now you're selling the 11 pieces at $19. So that means that you lost $1 on every one of the pieces that came before, right? So you'd lose $10 on every piece. So you take the $10 off of 20, you're down to 10, and then you only got $19, and you could see that because you lose money on all the previous sales, your marginal revenue is actually less. So anytime you have you see a marginal revenue curve, it will always be a greater slope or a greater negative slope than the demand curve, just because of that reason. And that's a pretty important concept, so make sure you really understand why the marginal revenue curve looks like it does in comparison to the demand curve. Okay, so now let's take a look at the marginal cost curve. So you could see that at the very beginning, you can see that the cost of making each additional piece goes down because you're picking up some efficiencies, and then at some point you get to the place where you have a minimum value for the amount that it's going to cost you to make one additional piece. And then after that, the cost of making each piece starts to go up. And there's a very interesting point that you get right here where the marginal cost curve and the marginal revenue curve intersect. So at this point where they intersect, that means that the cost of making one extra piece exactly equals the cost or the revenue you get from selling one additional piece. So at this point, it's break even to be making your product. Okay, so that means that anytime you're on the curve below that point, right, that means that your cost is going to be less than the revenue, right? So as you go up this curve, your cost is less than the marginal revenue, and every time you sell an additional piece, you actually make money. And then as soon as you go up your curve and start making more pieces above that curve, right, where's this green area, that means you're actually going to be losing money, because here your cost is, let's say, $12 or $13 going across, but your marginal revenue, right, is down here, right, which is only about $7. So as you go above that point, you lose money on every additional product you make, and then below that point, you make money on every additional product you make. So this is pretty universal, that a business should always be making product to the point where your marginal cost equals your marginal revenue. You always want to be operating at that point. Okay, now let's take a look at the other curve, which is the average total cost curve. And remember from eco8 that the average total cost, right, is the average fixed cost plus the average variable cost. It's the total cost of running your business divided by the number that you make. And you can see that the cost keeps coming down, 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 and to some point you hit a minimum, right? So that's the minimum of your average total cost, and then the cost starts going up again as you become more inefficient making your product. It's usually because of an increasing opportunity cost. That's what they like to quiz you on. The average total cost goes up as the quantity goes even further because your opportunity cost is increasing. So just to talk a little bit more about the opportunity cost increasing, so figure if your factory is working full-time and you make 2 or 3 different products, and you want to start making more of the first product, well, that means you got to take people off of the shift making the other product, right? Now, the other product could be making money. So as you divert your resources right? That becomes an opportunity cost that you give up from making the other thing to make this product. All right, so when you see a graph like this, some of the things they're going to talk about are economic profits, right? So what is your economic profit? So that's the amount of revenue that you receive minus the cost of making the revenue. Now, is it your marginal cost? No, it's your total cost of making it, minus also your opportunity cost of not doing something else. Now, with a graph like this, you really don't see the opportunity cost, so you could kind of ignore it for this. But there may be some questions where they're going to ask you, with economic profit, that the opportunity cost needs to be taken into consideration. All right, so here's the definition. Economic profit is the total revenue minus the total cost, including the opportunity cost. All right, so let's take a look at the graph and find out what the economic profit would be if the firm sold 10 pieces. All right, so at 10 pieces, we'll put a line right here, and we'll put a line right across here. All right, so the total revenue when you make 10 pieces is $20 times 10 pieces, or $200. Okay, and now the cost of making those 10 pieces, is it marginal cost? Is it marginal fixed cost? Is it variable cost? No. What you're looking at here is the average total cost, right? Because we're talking about how much we're making, so we got to look at the totals. So at 10 pieces, right, using the average total cost curve, it's $15. $15 times 10 is $150. So the 200 minus the 150 is a $50 economic profit. Okay, before we get to the first question, or question number 8, I just want to talk one more thing about this graph before we move on. In a perfectly competitive market, you're not going to be allowed to have economic profits, because if there's economic profits, somebody else is going to come in and compete with you. So what happens in a perfectly competitive marketplace is that the average cost will equal the marginal cost, and the price will also be right at the average total cost. So a perfectly competitive marketplace, the marginal cost equals the average cost, and that's going to be the price of the goods. All right, so now let's take a look at number 8, which we kind of already did. If the firm produces 10 units of output, its economic profits will be. So we already went through that, and that's going to be B, $50. All right, so in number 9, they ask you, which of the following is most likely to occur if the firm increases production beyond 10 units? So before we look at the choices, just take a look at the graph and kind of figure out what would happen. All right, so if he goes past 10, let's say over here to this area, we could see that he's going to be on the marginal revenue is going to be going down, and his marginal cost is going to be going up. So when you have the situation where your marginal cost is greater than your marginal revenue, you're losing money on every additional piece you make. Now that doesn't mean you're losing money overall, it just means for that additional piece that you make, you've lost more money. So you should never in business ever go up to have sales where your marginal cost exceeds your marginal revenue, right? You always want to stop right at that point. So we can see if he goes over 10, he's going to end up reducing his profits. Not going negative altogether, because then you're looking at the totals, but the profits will start to go down. Okay, we also know that looking at the demand curve, if I was up here and I start to make more than 10, I'm over here, we see that the price will go down. But what about his profits as he starts to make a little bit more than 10? Well, remember, his economic profits are the quantity he's selling times the price less the average total cost, right? So you could see, since the amount that you're selling at on the demand curve is still higher than the average total cost, he's still making money. Okay, so choice A says consumers will be willing to purchase more than 10 units at a price of $20. So we know that's absolutely not true because of the demand curve. As the quantity goes up, the customers will only pay less price, right? So we know that that cannot be true. Okay, choice B, the firm would definitely experience a loss. Well, we already talked about that, and we're still going to make money as long as the price is going to be greater than the average total cost. So just because he sells more, he doesn't start to lose money until way out here, right? Where all of a sudden he's taking in less money than his average total cost. So then that wouldn't be true either. Okay, now choice C says the firm would have to lower its price to sell more than 10. And that's exactly right, and that's just a typical application of the demand curve. As you're going to sell more and more and more, you can see that the consumers are going to pay less and less and less. So that is correct. Just for completeness, let's take a look at the other two choices. D, the firm's average cost of production would initially increase. So if we look at the average cost of production, we see that it actually starts to go down before it goes up. So it doesn't initially increase, it actually initially decreases. So know that that's not right. Finally, the last one is the firm's profit would increase. Now, we know that anytime we start to sell a quantity where the marginal cost is greater than the marginal revenue, at that point your firm's profits will decrease. So we know that that is not right either. So this graph is important, and these questions are just samples of what you'll get on this. There's a lot of questions you could be asked about this type of curve with marginal cost, marginal revenue. So make sure you have a good feel of how these relationships work, because we'll be seeing this again and again.